All right, Dr. Cohen, let's first start with Chandler Halderson. I think we could do a whole show on Chandler Halderson for the next 40 minutes, but let's first start with the idea of, if you believe what the prosecution says, his ability to lie to the people in his life, lying to his parents about where he was working, what he was doing for money, how much money he had, jobs that he was trying to get, his education, injuries he sustained, lying to his girlfriend's family. How is someone able to continually do that?
Well, so with lying and pathological lying, it certainly makes you think of what we call psychopathy. Psychopaths are individuals who like to manipulate others. They don't have a conscience. They don't really follow conventional morality, and really everything is a means towards an end. And you can have people on that spectrum. You have the most severe psychopath, but you also have people who are sort of, on the path or on the spectrum of psychopathy, but maybe have a less severe form of it. And those people are often very narcissistic. So, when I hear about Chandler Halderson and these lies that all seem to point to things that would touch on your self-esteem, like what kind of an education do you have? What kind of a job do you have? And that he seems to try to be protecting his self-esteem by creating this facade for his parents. And then prosecutors allege that when the facade was burst by his parents, by his father discovering that these were lies, that was the motive. So if that's indeed the case as alleged, then it certainly makes you think about narcissism, someone who can't tolerate a negative perception of themselves, and also about psychopathy.
Well, let's continue on, because his behavior is a study in and of itself. We also heard from Dulce's partner. She took the stand and talked about Chandler's kind of odd behavior in the weekend in question. Yeah, and the judge said he'll put that under advisement, that issue, and rule if necessary during the trial and the police interview. So I do want to ask you here, doctor, it seems to me when we deal with these kinds of cases, road rage, right? Both on the part of maybe the victim and the defendant. There is evidence that they want to put in the defense that the victim had engaged in prior incidents of road rage. What happens to people in these kinds of situations?
Well, we often think about evolution. Our brain developed a fight or flight response. That response is really helpful if there's you see a lion suddenly pop up in the jungle or something like that, and you need to run away, or if you need to capture something and kill it. But that fight or flight response and those kind of innate rageful capacities that we have when we need to defend ourselves are often very counterproductive in our day-to-day life. So when you're driving, we really want someone to be calm, cool, rational, not overly reactive. But of course, we have that in our DNA. And so very often when you feel disrespected on the road, or when someone you feel has put you in danger, it can involuntarily elicit a very strong reaction. Now, if you take someone who anyway has problems with anger management, with someone who might have an impulse control disorder, or just has a history of violence, then of course it can become a lethal combination. And of course we see that all the time. And clearly that happened in this case. However you want to describe it, this resulted in a homicide. So clearly the feelings got out of control.
Well, it's also a case of possible self-defense. So when this trial begins and you're going to hear maybe the defendant himself take the stand and talk about acting in self-defense, what are the things that you will be looking out for? And maybe should a psychologist or psychiatrist be called to the stand to further have the jury understand these issues?
Well, they certainly could, and so judges, to try to be balanced on this, it really is a determination for the jury. They are supposed to take into account the past history of the individual to understand their state of mind when they thought they needed to defend themselves. So, for example, if I've been mugged in the past when I was going in a dark alley in New York City, and now I'm walking in a dark alley in New York City and I shoot someone who's unarmed because I felt under threat, the jury is allowed to consider the fact that I have a history of being mugged, that's part of my psychology. Now, that kind of a fact pattern in and of itself doesn't require a psychiatrist necessarily to explain it to the jury. The jury can just hear it and weigh it based on their common sense and experience. But certainly if there's a history of mental health issues, for example, if I had PTSD from when I was mugged, and that's even putting me on trigger alert, then I think you would want to have a psychiatrist, add that level of expert opinion. So I think in this case, it could go either way depending on what fact pattern emerges.
And it's interesting because I think self-defense cases are some of the most fascinating trials, particularly with the defendant possibly testifying, and you never know really which way the jury's going to go, particularly as we heard with the Kyle Rittenhouse case and now this one. So it's going to be great to see, and hopefully Dr. Cohen will join us when we cover this trial live on the network. Dr. Cohen, thank you so much for coming on. Have a great weekend. Thanks for breaking down all these cases with me. I am signing off. You're in great hands, and Jeanette Levy is up next. We'll be back.